do I have any like big soda fans in the audience?
Oh yeah.
Some big soda fans? Yeah? We have a few of them? Okay. So what are the major like sodas? Those of you that are big soda fans, what do you like?
What kind of soda do you like?
Wild cherry
Orange
Pepsi.
soda. Yeah.
What kind?
Orange soda.
Orange soda.
Yeah.
Root beer. And root beer. Yeah, I already knew that.
Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper? Okay.
Wild cherry Pepsi, and you know what? The new watermelon Mountain Dew is like amazing. So
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you for not saying seltzer.
it's not technically soda, but it is delicious.
I don't know. Just based on your defensive seltzer right there, I'm pretty much willing to dismiss everything else you said. What do you like?
Pepsi. Dr. Pepper.
Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew. Okay. All right. You know, we have Christian liberty. I guess we can allow Mountain Dew. Boy, tough crowd. I didn't get what I was fishing for.
Cherry Dr. Pepper.
You can get those machines.
Ginger ale.
That was not what I was looking for.
You can get those machines that
All
you
right,
can make any soda you want.
now I'm going to have to rely on folks that, you know, stretching back a few years. If you remember, there was this time in the 80s where they came out with what they called the New Coke. Do you remember the New Coke?
No. I wasn't
I do.
alive.
Okay, I know. Okay, so there's a niche of the population here, and they're not as young as you are. Okay, but do you remember the New Coke?
It was just as terrible as the old.
Okay,
Vaguely.
now the New Coke was only out for a little while.
Was it gross?
Yes.
I know it was terrible. That's why.
How?
And the Pepsi Challenge.
The Pepsi Challenge, yeah. But so if you
Yeah,
remember,
that's right.
after a little while with the New Coke became the defunct Coke, and they brought back what had been at that point just Coke, and this is where you got the Coca-Cola Classic.
What was wrong with the new Coke?
It was horrible.
What was different about it?
It tasted like terrible. Okay? Nobody liked it. Like, Coke was losing crazy amounts of market share. So they brought it back. Now, in the 70s, Coke has had an advertising campaign. And as a matter of fact, some of the more famous things that even we think of in pop culture come out of various aspects of advertising. You know, a lot of us during Christmas time, right, we have the polar bears that are drinking bottles of Coke. That started off as a Coke advertising campaign. Well, in the 70s, Coke kicked off an advertising campaign called The Real Thing. And The Real Thing advertising was really, really big in the 70s, all kinds of songs. And it was actually like multi-years, which is rare for an advertising campaign.
What was the
usually-
Super Bowl one? Yeah, take mine.
So, but what happened after Coke went through their mad existence of the New Coke, they went back to the old Coke, now distinctly named Coca-Cola Classic, so that they can also have Cherry Coke and this Coke and that Coke and every other Coke. And they brought back some of the aspects of the Real Thing advertising campaign, because there are Super Bowl commercials for Coke that you can go through where they actually reach back and they talk about Coke as the real thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to what?
As opposed to the mad existence, terrible old New Coke existence. And if you know an ardent Coke fan, do any of you know any ardent Coke fans?
Nope.
I know someone who is an ardent
I
Coke
know
fan.
myself.
Okay?
I know myself.
They had to have their Coke.
It's
What?
you know,
Coke.
well, of course, it's Coke.
Coca-Cola. What does that mean?
And for them, New Coke is like some sort of like strange abomination, okay? So for them, it's the real thing. And you know what? What's interesting is that if you took somebody that was like an ardent Coke fan and you gave them some New Coke and then you gave them some Coca-Cola Classic, they would instantly be able to tell the difference. How many of you can tell the difference between like name brand sodas and like store brands? right? And any of you do that? Like if I went through and I got you some like Mountain Dew and then like some Mountain Thunder or whatever else it's called. Can you tell the difference?
Yes.
Yes?
I have a sensitive palate.
How many of you can tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi? Right? How about if I get over here and I get like, see, it's great. Since we're like a not-for-profit, I can mention name brands and I won't get killed by the FCC.
A&W, Bark.
Yeah, how many of you can tell your root beers as you go through, like, oh, okay, this one is this, and no, don't give me that one, right? We can taste the difference. And by the way, as I'm speaking here, all of you go, man, he's hitting on like every major junk food advertising campaign of the last 30 years. Well, believe it or not, the Bible has an awful lot to say about the real thing. Nothing to say about Coke, but an awful lot to say about the real thing. I'm still in Philippians chapter 1. I like moving really, really slow. That way I don't give anyone whiplash. So Philippians chapter 1, I'm going to be looking at 9 through 11. And yeah, I've really enjoyed kind of looking through this over the past really couple weeks. So in Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 9, it begins, "And this I pray." So Paul is still addressing the church at Philippi. And he's already talked about, how dear this church is to him. So he goes on, "And this I pray," talking about his prayer for them, "that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment." So I love this because he wants their love, and the word here used is that Greek agape love. This, we talk about how it's a love of choice. It's interesting because if you even look at some of the roots that the word comes from, it talks about preference. So this is a volitional love. This is a love you choose. Which means that when God talks about loving us in this way, it's a love based on His choice, not how effectively I can mess up. So the only way to change that is to change God's mind. And God has pledged not to. So when we look at this, he's saying that your love, in other words, what you choose to set your affection on, will abound. Now, I don't think I need to explain what the word abound means. I think we're probably all set here. So Paul is talking to the Philippians about what they choose to set their affection on. He goes, let it grow more and more. And he lists two things, in knowledge and all discernment. Now, when he talks about knowledge...
Where are we, Mark? I'm sorry, where are we?
Philippians 1,
Yep.
Starting in verse 9.
9, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
So, knowledge. Now, if you dig into this one talks about what you gain by first-hand interaction or experience. So he wants their love to abound more and more in knowledge, in this first-hand experience. And there's a little bit of a kind of a dual focus here. Knowledge and experience of a person, the person of God, and knowledge and experience with God's truth. Now, if you think about it, that's as definitive a measuring stick as you're going to get. God doesn't change. His truth doesn't change. So he's saying, yes, I want you to set your affection. I want you to have a preference in your affection, but let it be guided by who God is and what His truth is, and in all discernment. And the word here actually has the idea of something that can cut through the haze of moral ambiguity. Now, I know it's easy for us to look around. We may look around at American culture. We may look around at Western culture and say, have we lost our way? One of the things that's really interesting is even working with secular people this summer, I heard a variation of this phrase many, many times. I actually lost count. The first 5 or 6 times, I kept track. It's almost like what was right before is considered wrong, and what was wrong before is considered right. Now, I heard this from people who were not talking about any kind of Bible background, or if they did, it was when they were 7, We're not talking about people who espouse any belief about God, about Jesus, about anything to do with the Bible. But even they looked at it and said, it's almost like we've flipped things. That's a moral haze. It was sobering even for me sitting in various meetings sometimes as they discussed things like, that's to say, alternative lifestyles participating in athletics. I think that that's ambiguous enough that hopefully some of the younger ones are going, hopefully the older ones have an idea of where I'm going with that. And watching the facial expressions of the people talking about it, knowing that they can't say that it's wrong or that it's bad, but watching them viscerally react to the point that, you can tell they're not really big fans of this because they have, people like daughters at home. And they understand the implications for that. They're going, well, this is what we do. Isn't that nice? We're running into problems where people knee-jerk know what the proper answer is, but they can't figure out a way that they can create a politically correct explanation for why that's what we're going to do. When Paul's talking about discernment, he's talking about the ability to cut through that. And if we've had to deal with it in our interactions with people, you know just how hard that can be. This is an ethical perception. And we live in a culture that is ethically adrift. You know what? We're not the first people to have to do that. Sometimes we have this idea, it's never been as bad as it is now. Please, I caution you to do this, but please research Greco-Roman culture. There were a lot of things about Greco-Roman culture that were about as upside down as you're going to get. There were things that the Romans saw as virtues that we would say, that is not a virtue. That is about as far from a virtue as you can get. There are things that they thought were actually just fine that we still in the United States recognize as, no, that's not only just wrong and twisted and ethically nasty, that's actually illegal. And you're talking about something that would be regularly practiced in the society. So please don't think here that Paul is talking about a society that's all like nice and prim and proper. So he wants them, yes, he wants their love to grow. Love to grow for others in general, for one another. He wants it to, this idea of abounding, more and more. Kind of almost that double standard. Let it really, really glow. Kind of let it rip. But let it be guided. Because remember, the love he's talking about is a preferential love. He goes, yes, but you need to have those preferences guided. Because if you have this unbridled, unguided love, you can set it on the wrong things. You can set it on things that aren't going to honor God and that aren't going to have the moral perception that's needed. Because there are things in this world that you ought not to love. I mean, if I can be supremely general, there's this great big category of things called sin that you ought not to love. And you ought not to love its impact that it has on people. So he wants their love to grow, but he wants it to be guided. He wants it to be guided by the knowledge of God, his truth, and his moral standards. Now he's going to continue here, so that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment. Verse 10, that you may approve the things that are excellent. Now, most of us kind of have this idea, okay, we know what approve is. The cool thing with this is it talks about testing with the ability to recognize something as genuine. This was a word that was actually regularly used of precious metals. Now, you're probably aware today, we have people in the United States government dedicated to finding counterfeit currency. Believe it or not, actually, ironically, the Secret Service, who we now say, well, that protects the life of the president and other people, actually began to stop counterfeiting in the United States. That's actually where the Secret Service came from. The Secret Service wasn't started to make sure that the president wasn't assassinated. The Secret Service was started to stop counterfeiting. But counterfeiting has always been a problem. That's why you ever watch those movies where you see people get a coin and they bite it? You ever see any of those? Have you ever wanted to vomit? You know, think about what do? Hey, child has money and they put it in mouth. No! You're going to get the bubonic plague. Well, ironically enough, they were biting coins while the bubonic plague was actually killing, like, I don't know, 1/3 of Europe. Why would you bite a coin? What's wrong with you?
See if it's real.
Well, how is biting a coin going to tell you it's real?
Metal's softer than it's supposed to be.
Yeah, coins were made typically either out of gold or silver, and especially gold coins. Gold is very, very soft the more pure it is.
You're just going to have a bunch of bite marks on your body, that's fine.
Yeah! Wait, that sounds good. You know, the idea is if it's pure enough gold, if you bite it, you should be able to see the indentation of your tooth. That was like currency testing. Because any of the metals that they would alloy gold with to help it hold its shape would be harder than that. So if the gold is as pure as it's supposed to be, you ought to see a tooth mark. By the way, this is one of the reasons why they corrugated the sides of coins. You ever notice that, like, you know, especially quarters, you notice how they have the little ridges on them? Do you know why they're there?
People used to shave off edges.
Yeah. If your coins were smooth, what people would do, if you get like a merchant, let's face it, merchants are regularly having money go through their hands regularly, all the time. That's what they do. They don't get to keep it all, but what they would do is they would take their coins and they would have something sharpened off to the side. They would just, you know, take a couple little nicks off and then put it back in currency, you know. Well, you do that long enough, and pretty soon you have a nice little pile of shavings, only that pile of shavings is gold and silver. Pretty soon you have enough shavings where you have a coin's worth sitting in the back. You do that month after month, year after year, and guess what? You've made a tidy little sum of money, and all you've basically been doing now, we would say they're debasing the value of the currency, because they're taking away the precious metal. See, don't think that playing with currency is anything new. So Paul here is reaching into something saying, hey, look, you need to test this to see if it's genuine, to see if it's real. And this would be a word that they would regularly use if you were a gold purifier. They would test it to make sure that it was true, to make sure, here it is, that it's the real thing. To make sure it's the real thing. Because if it's not the real thing, how valuable is it? Now, I know we don't use gold and silver coins now, but imagine being paid for something with a check that bounces. Does it sting? What's the value of making sure something is the real thing?
Priceless.
Because if it's not real, it's worthless. If somebody walked in here with a suitcase of money, $1 million in 20s, but it's all counterfeit currency, what's it worth?
Fire starter.
It's a fire starter. Why? Because it's not the real thing. Paul wants them to be the real thing, that you may approve, that when you put something to the test, you can know it's the real thing. And he wants them to test to see if they are excellent. Something far surpassing in value. And the word has the idea of being carried through all the way to the end. So that when you put stuff to the test, you can find out that those things are valuable enough, are worthwhile enough, that you'll take them with you for the rest of your life. That you carry them all the way through to their natural conclusion, that you carry it all the way through to the end of your days. Why? Because it's worth it, it's real. It's true. And if we look back from before, because you hold that in love based on God's truth. That you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ. Sincere actually connects kind of that idea of approved, because this word means unalloyed or judged by sunlight. Now it might sound weird, judged by sunlight. If you were buying pottery in the ancient world, you wanted to buy your pottery during the day. Does anyone know why?
You can see it.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to see. But I mean, why is it especially, you want to, actually best, you want to buy your pottery on a sunny, not even a cloudy day?
Then you can see if it melts.
And see if it melts. If it melts, you might have another problem.
Correct.
Yeah. You would hold it up to the sunlight to see, because they would paint over it. They would try to hide it, right? Because let's face it, if the pot cracks, it's now worthless to them. But if they can hide it to see if they can get away with having you pay for it, even though it's worthless, great, they sold something to you that was worthless. And you may say, that doesn't sound very ethical. I told you that Greco-Roman society wasn't exactly known for its niceties. Only good luck conducting any investigation with the Better Business Bureau. So you would hold it up to the sunlight, because the sunlight would allow you to see through it, enough to be able to tell if there were any fissures or cracks in this that they just try to gloss over before selling it to you. By the way, we still do this today. If you know anyone that does any interior designing or anything like that, if you're picking out colors for a room, what do you want to match up those colors?
Furniture.
You want natural light. Natural light is valuable. You don't want to do it by artificial light. It throws it off. Something that can look great in artificial light, you hit it with sunlight, and you're going, whoa, what happened here? I know someone who's a carver who only painted by natural light. That's it. As soon as the light bulbs had to go on, done. Wouldn't paint anymore. Because you can't see the proper color contrast. You can't see the shadows right. You can't make sure it's perfect. If you really, really get into it, that's what you want. You want it to be as real as possible. Be sincere. Be unalloyed. Don't be mixed with anything that's going to knock the purity. Be sincere and without offense. Blameless. And there's actually, it's interesting, because even though it being an adjective, there's an active and a passive side. In other words, be without offense actively. Don't actively give a reason for people. Don't go over and deliberately try to tick people off. But also don't be passive. Don't let things linger that you know full well are going to offend people, especially when they come into contact with the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel is offensive enough to people. Don't let things linger in life that are going to cause additional offense. So there's an active sense and a passive sense that we can have to this word. When? All the way to the day of Christ. You don't stop. Don't stop. It's like, well, I did that for like a week. I was doing really good, and I can be done now. I think sometimes we'd like to, rest on our laurels. I had a really good day, so now I want to kick back. You ever notice that's usually when you get hit the hardest, is when you've decided to give yourself a day off? I got a great plan. I'm just going to stay home today. You know what? As soon as you decide, God, I got this, I've got my plan over here, be very, very careful. You don't determine the end game, He does. You may be sincere and without offense to the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. I love this idea of being filled, because in English, we have, if we, get into our grammar here, you have active voice and passive voiced verbs. But Greek gives us something called middle voice, which we don't even have in English, and it's a lot of fun to even try to figure out exactly how this works. To the best I can kind of boil it down in English, because we don't have a perfect equivalent, this basically means that the person is actively allowing themselves to be acted on. So you're like willfully allowing yourself to be filled. And that's about as good as I can do the Greek justice here, and as well as I can put it across. But if you're being filled, let's face it, that's something that certainly is happening to you. But you're not necessarily doing the filling yourself. Think about it. What are you being filled with? Look at the text. You being filled with?
Fruit of righteousness.
Fruit of righteousness. Hey folks, how well do we do making ourselves righteous? The fruit of righteousness is that natural result. We expect things like trees, berry bushes. Don't we expect them to bear fruit? I mean, if you don't have maybe let's say an apple tree. Apples are big around here. If you have an apple tree that's not producing apples, the idea is, okay, there's obviously something wrong with the nutrition or its growing conditions or something like that, right? Because what's an apple tree supposed to do?
Grow apples.
Right? That's not like earth-shattering right here. If somebody says, hey, guys, guess what? My apple tree is growing apples. You'd be like, yeah, it's kind of what it's supposed to do.
We use the apple trees at our house.
That's right. Our apple tree's defective because I don't know what I'm doing. Right? But if you get somebody that does know what they're doing, they make apples, right? Imagine if you went up to the orchards in Peru and you walked into their farms and be like, this year, folks, our apple trees, they've got apples. You'd be like, yeah, that's kind of the idea here. If you haven't figured that out yet, I'm trying to figure out how you're still in business. That's what they're supposed to do. It's the natural result of being an apple tree. The natural result of us being filled by God should be to produce something, produce that fruit of righteousness. Not our righteousness, His righteousness. You can see this, which are by Jesus Christ. We don't produce fruit in and of ourselves. We don't make righteousness in and of ourselves. But He does intend to produce fruit by us. And ultimately, the end game here, we see this to the glory and praise of God. This is awesome because the final outworking then should be God is glorified, God is praised. Because ultimately speaking, we have to point others to God. Now, one of my favorite sayings that I'm going to steal wholeheartedly, let's take the word Christian real quick. Now, there's two parts to that word, right? There's Christ, He can help humanity. And there's Ian, and he's not all that helpful. Sorry, okay. He laughed, but I don't know what that means. Anyways, but bottom line is, if I'm interacting with somebody, the first thing I have to remember, I in and of myself am no more useful to them than any other person, except for whatever God is going to work and do through me. Our basic need is for God, not just some other human being. And I'm not trying to devalue human interaction. I'm not trying to say that we don't have a moral responsibility to help others. But bottom line, if all I'm trying to do ever and only is to help people out of my own resources and what I know, then we will always fall short of what they actually need. We have to put God's resources on the table for them. I can't save anyone. I didn't die for them. I can't give them that new birth that they need. I can't teach them the proper way to live. I can't teach them the proper way to look at reality. I have to have that received in myself first before I can do anything else. And then all I'm doing is just displaying what God has already taught me to somebody else. They need him, not me. So ultimately, I want the praise and the glory to go to God because that's ultimately who they need to look to. Because if somebody gets stuck and all they do is ever look to me, I will fail at some point. And if all of their trust in God is built really on a foundation of trust in me, eventually it's going to crash. And I think especially now, we've seen enough church scandals and stuff like that to understand. I'm not talking about here, I'm talking about in general. Especially in the Western church, we've seen people that at one time were regarded as Bible teachers fall to say, look, if you don't build your faith on God and in the work of Jesus, and you build it on some man, eventually it's going to fall apart because that man isn't perfect. So please, always, 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 and I love this, that he ends this, to the glory and praise of God. Let the praise, the glory, let everything flow to him because it's only him that we're actually going to see hope and help for humanity. Not us. And I'm not trying to devalue the role of messengers that we have, but remember, we're only messengers, we're not message creators. We share hope that we have been given. Now I want to be able to kind of tie this in here because as I sat and I thought about this passage, what really stuck out to me is how important it is to be the real thing, how important it is to be authentic. And if there's anything that people need to see, it's something that's real. It's something that is. It's a group of people that don't need to redefine and say, well, it depends what the meaning of the word is. And some of you that are old enough know what I'm referring to. It's something that's fixed. And I see that as Paul's prayer for them. What am I praying for? Yes, I'm praying for your love to be abounded. I'm praying for you to be the real thing when the rest of the city of Philippi interacts with you. That you are exactly who you say you are. That they don't have to worry that you're trying to mix something else into the spiritual pedigree and tell it off. That you're not trying to sell them some snake oil. That you're not trying to make them think something else when actually a different reality is true. That you're the real thing. And through the powered work of God, I'm convinced that that's why we see the growth of the gospel in places like Philippi. Because it was the real thing. I look at this and I say, Lord, help me not just be the real thing, but then help me show other people what the real thing looks like. The gospel is going to offend. We know that. We're told that up front. But we also know that those that God is calling to himself, the gospel will attract. But those that are being attracted by God to the gospel are not going to be helped if I'm giving some sort of strange amalgamation. Remember when I talked about that word sincere means unalloyed, not mixed with something else. Let it be sincere. Don't mix it. Harold has been talking about in Galatians, one gospel. Don't pervert that one true gospel. In the context they're talking about the Judaizers. But look, when we come back even in Philippians, that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. Let's let everything in our lives be unalloyed. Don't mix it with our own preferences. Don't mix it with the preferences of the day. Let it be is real. And I say, well, yeah, that could be really unpopular. It was unpopular then too. But a mixed or diluted gospel, a mixed and diluted lifestyle, isn't going to turn the world upside down. It's going to be too easily dismissed. It's going to be too easily mistaken for something else. An unalloyed gospel, a pure lifestyle based on what God has given to us and shown us, based on our own love for Him and desire to live by His truth. That is the hope for humanity. Can you think of any life in human history that has been undiluted towards God? Can you think of one? Yeah. Look at the impact of His life. Look at the impact of His sacrifice. Now, I understand. Number one, we are, that's to say, very, very distinct and different from the Son of God. But one of the things that I find amazing is 2,000 years later, people are still debating the impact of Jesus. He was completely unmixed, completely undiluted, completely unalloyed. And He changed everything. And I can see that challenge here. I love the fact that this is Paul's prayer for them. He's already talked about how much he loves them and appreciates them. And in the midst of this, he says, guys, be real. Don't mix anything else in. Because if that's true of you, watch the kind of fruit God can produce. And I think in this room, I think we look out and we say, we ask God, help our country, Lord, reach some of our neighbors, reach some of our loved ones, save them. And I think we have this desire, Lord, help us not be mixed, because we want to see the fruit that comes, that you produce, when we don't allow anything else in. Only what you have for us. All right. Well, I just want to kind of wrap up here. That's been the big challenge even for me in looking at this. So there are other things in the passage besides that whole idea of being the real thing. And no, I didn't just spend 4 hours on YouTube watching Coke commercials or something like that, so don't worry. But that idea of the real thing, because boy, if there's anything that I see in my conversations with people that I hear, it's people want something to just be real. Think about it. How many things has the word fake been attached to in the last year and a half? Yeah, fake news is only probably the most big headline grabber. But anyway, it's fake this, it's fake that. How's trust doing in the public square today? How trusting is anything? How cynical are people about anything? Just leave you with this, just to let you know just how important this is, so why this kind of rose to such prominence in my mind. How many of you know who Mr. Rogers is? Like Fred Rogers, his little neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Right? Some of you younger ones haven't, I'm sorry.
Take them to the movie, it's good.
Okay. But yeah, so they put out a movie about it.
Yeah.
Now, do you remember what the premise of the script line of the movie is?
The reporter's trying to find some dirt on Mr. Roger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's an investigative journalist, and basically no one wants to do any interviews with him at all. Because he's ticked off every other person, because he's always found dirt or something, some way, some angle to get at them where it makes them look bad or they look dumb or something like that. So pretty soon no one will grant him an interview at all. He's a great journalist, great writer, but no one wants to talk to him. So they give him Fred Rogers. And the interesting thing is, Fred Rogers knew who the guy was. He actually researched him. And Fred Rogers' producers urged him not to do the interview. And he did it anyways. You want to know how much dirt the journalist found at the end?
Zilch.
None. And I see a really interesting picture of where people are today. We don't believe there's anything that exists as something that's real, the real thing, that truly is the way it says it is. But boy, oh boy, if we could find something that was, it would change our lives. We'd love there to be something like that. We just don't think it's real. That was the approach of this investigative journalist. He desperately needed something to be real. He just didn't think it was there. Fred Rogers is only a man. How much greater if through us people can see Jesus Christ. If people will go to His Word, see His life, see His love for them. Because at some point we'll stumble. Jesus never did. You want to talk about no dirt? They're literally zero. Well, He didn't compromise, but there's no dirt. And I think that if you go through and watch the movie, I think you can see and hear society crying for something real. Will we share the real thing that we know is there? And it's not just words on a page. Ultimately, it takes them to the person of Jesus. You're not going to get any more real than Him. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank You for Your Word. Thank You for what it teaches. Thank You for the hope that it gives. And so, Lord, as we just kind of get ready to head out, I pray that You will impress on our hearts just how important it is to be in Your Word, to fellowship with You, that we line up, that we are exactly what You would have us to be. Not because that makes us sound cool, because ultimately it will lead folks to give glory to You, that it will bring them to You, and that as they catch glimpses of You, they will accept Your truth. And ultimately, Lord, we would love to see them accept Jesus and understand that that payment is for them. Help us to share what we know, and help us to keep it pure. In Jesus' name, amen.